Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Prehm, Erik Skopil, Jared Mack on this Tuesday edition of the show. Welcome to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. A lot to get to. It's been a eventful, 4 or 5 days. We've got a reinstatement with Traeshon Holden. We're going to discuss that. We've seen a couple coaching hires from an assistant off-field roles get announced. And then also basketball heading into its tournament play for the women. Final weekend of the season for the men, and both teams coming off wins, which is a good thing to see. But let's start with Traeshon Holden. Alabama transfer wide receiver was arrested, put into jail, was released from jail, and then the local authorities here, the district attorney, decided not to press charges. And Dan Lanning has reinstated Traeshon Holden after removing him from the program following his arrest. This is good news for Traeshon Holden. His name has been cleared legally. That's the most important thing. Found no wrongdoing. And secondly, for Oregon, which we're going to talk about, this fills some concerns with depth again. And when he was gone, it was, well, like they've got the bodies, but if they suffer one injury, things could get dicey. Now they get a starter back, or at least we should say a projected starter. And every guy down below him goes down a ring, which just gives you a little bit more depth, better depth, more established depth.
Yeah, I mean, that was the concern we had when we recorded a podcast, which might have been one of my most recent podcasts. I was off for the week and haven't really had a whole lot of time to discuss the Holden situation, I don't think, on air. And I think this was pretty notable. From a roster perspective, this was a guy who we had all marked in as a probable starter. As we talked about, I think on that podcast, I'm remembering, where do you go now? Is it worth using a scholarship? I think that was going to be a bit of a disappointment if you had to utilize one there. Obviously, would be replacing Holden's outgoing scholarship in that case. But this late in the process, you just don't know if you'd find a player with starting experience at the specific position that Holden has. So no, I think it's really notable that he is reinstated and with the team again. It certainly clears up the concerns you had at receiver. I think offensively, the only position you now kind of go, gosh, they better add a player. It remains tight end, and that's been a position we felt that way for a while, and there won't be any movement on that until May. So, we don't need to go down that one too far. But I think had they not reinstated Holden and you'd gone through spring, and maybe you'd gone through spring and come out the other side saying, okay, we feel okay about it. But I do think there's another world where you would have felt, God, we need to add a body here or two. And to avoid that, added roster addition, I think is probably a win. And then at the end of the day, this is a guy who proved he was pretty darn dangerous around the red zone for an Alabama offense last year that was not obviously peak Alabama, but not exactly a scrub either, competing all the way, deep into their season for a potential conference championship berth. So, a quality player. And we've kind of talked about his skill set and how it fits at Oregon ad nauseum, so I don't need to go over it too much. But yeah, this is a win for Oregon, and certainly, I don't know how much I want to get into the off the field part of it, but I think this is the first real major off the field incident with an Oregon football player in a minute, and that's a very positive thing. And I think you also feel, just from a perspective of the type of athletes that are in the program, that as Matt laid out, there's no legal ramifications, and from everything that's been kind of detailed, it doesn't sound like Holden, there was really any wrongdoing involved there. So you like to see that too, in general, in terms of if you're supporting an athletic venture, you hope that those involved in it are stand-up citizens, and one player out of 85 doesn't ruin that, but you certainly like to make sure that everybody on there, has somewhat of a clean history or whatnot. So I think all around, this is a pretty big story for Oregon, and a nice victory after what could have been kind of a disappointing outcome had there been, I think, more legal standing to keep him off the team.
Yeah, it would have been, excuse me, would have been really disappointing if Traeshon had wasn't reinstated by Dan. I think I'll touch on that, and I apologize for my voice sounding a little hoarse, a little muppety here. I was battling a head cold this past weekend. But I think it was the right decision from Dan to originally, suspend Traeshon Holden from the team, just because he's clearly got a zero tolerance policy when it comes to his players and his personnel as well. I think as details came out, it was clear that Dan had a change of mind and a change of direction once the further details of the issues came out and Traeshon Holden's name was cleared. I think that's just how it should work in general. I think it's how it works in the core of law. And I think that Dan made the right decision by, moving in swiftly, taking the chance and dismissing Traeshon from the team, but also made the right decision by reinstating him. And I think the way Dan worded it in his official statement, it was more of a, Traeshon has the opportunity to rejoin the team. So if Traeshon had felt slighted any way possible, I'm sure he could have, enter the portal in May and go find another team. But it was clear from the 3-4 weeks, 5 weeks that he's been here since transferring from Alabama that he feels a part of the program and a part of the team, and respects Dan for making that original decision. So I think all in all for the program, it's a very important past couple of weeks. You get Traeshon back on the team. We talked ad nauseum about how they needed a Z receiver. I guess I'll kind of transition into the football part of this, but they needed a Z receiver. We went over that for probably 20 or 30 minutes, and now they have one. They have their projected starter, their projected Z receiver, someone who I think can make an impact in this offense overall. Didn't seem great there for a couple of days, just where it was, wow, Oregon's going to need another receiver instead of having to rely on guys who are unproven or true freshmen, whatever the case may be. But now it looks a little brighter at the end of the tunnel there. So it's always good to see for Oregon's wide receiving group. But I think adding Holden back into the mix gives their offense a little bit more of a prolific look and exactly the body type and this receiver skill set that you want there. So yeah, it was a good outcome for Oregon. It certainly has been, a wild couple of weeks in collegiate athletics in terms of, players being arrested, especially with the Brandon Miller case going on. So for Oregon, this is certainly probably the best result possible.
Now, I don't think we need to go too much into just the impact here because we did it when Traeshon Holden committed, like Jared said. They've got their Z receiver. They did announce a couple off-field roles for the football program as well, and these are going to be more and more common because the NCAA is allowing more coaches to coach on the field, and it's going to turn into essentially an arms race. What programs have the resources to hire qualified coaches and pay them good salaries, even though they're not technically one of the air quotes 10 assistant coaches that are on your staff? Your running backs coach, your quarterbacks coach, your defensive line coach. The college ball is trending towards the NFL, where the NFL has the defensive line coach, and then they've got the assistant defensive line coach. That's where Erik Terry came from. He was an assistant defensive line coach as this past season for the Minnesota Vikings, now is Oregon's offensive line coach, and they've hired 2 new guys to fill these kinds of roles. Both of them strong ties with the Oregon State Beavers, which I thought was interesting. Brian Michalowski has been hired as the inside linebackers assistant coach. He actually spent time working with Dan Lanning at Georgia. This is a young coach, up and comer. He spent time coaching Colorado's outside linebackers. He was a defensive analyst for Colorado as well. Spent some time under the Mike Norvell tree at Memphis as a graduate assistant coach. He's got some JUCO experience. He's even coached, I think, overseas European.
Yeah, you're forgetting the most important one. He was a defensive coordinator for the German Football League.
Yeah.
That's incredible staple to have on your resume. That gets you.
That was the most impressive thing I found about him.
And then he was also a undergraduate, wide range of titles at Arizona State. So this looks like someone who was viewed as an up and coming position coach. Was noted as a top 15 Pac-12 recruiter a couple of years ago when he was at Colorado. He's got some connections with Dan Lanning, obviously. And then they've also hired Mike Cavana. And that name may sound familiar, more familiar, because it's a longtime Oregon State offensive line coach. Spent, I think, over a decade at Oregon State. Worked with Mike Riley there and was there during, Oregon State, some of their biggest seasons in program history. And you like to see this. I think this is a good hire because Erik Terry is young. We talked about this. There's probably going to be some growing pains here. This is his first Power 5 position job. It's a big job. And now you've got a long-standing coach who he can lean on, who can give him tips, and who's also just pretty darn good himself as an assistant coach. I think these are two good hires, and this is why it's important that football programs like Oregon have the resources they can to afford these types of coaches, because it's insanely positive.
These hires both made a lot of sense, and I think Michalski's been a name I think we've seen for a couple of years, a couple of cycles, because of his ties with Lanning, and it's notable that inside linebacker is the position group he's leading, is the position group that Lanning has been in charge of working with as the defensive coordinator. His responsibility has been inside linebackers. Tosh has been working outside linebackers, etc. So this was a you're bringing in somebody who has to have a very specific understanding of what Lanning wants from that position group, somebody that will be working on a day-to-day basis with Lanning. So this is going to have to be somebody that has this is, aside from obviously the position coaches on the field, like one of the more important roles I think to fill on this staff for Lanning, in terms of this is a guy who's going to be kind of his eyes and ears when he's not there in that room. So I think it's pretty notable and pretty telling based upon the kind of shared history. I wish Dan had a little experience as well in the German Football League, because we'd probably have some great stories to hear, but I digress. Because what was the big story about Mario Cristobal when he was here? He had that fun element about he was almost a CIA agent. Dan doesn't quite have the career touchstone like that. What's the closest thing?
Nah, he's just got a normal, really good career arc where he starts as a GA and then moves his way up to defensive coordinator.
It's kind of boring.
Such an average Joe. Yeah, it's kind of stinks.
Yeah.
Was Mario CIA or was it Secret Service? I thought it was Secret Service.
Was it Secret Service? I can't remember. Somebody Google it. It was one of the two. He was trying to get.
I thought he was going to be Kevin Costner in The Bodyguard.
Well, that would be pretty dang impressive. Great film, by the way. People should check that one out. It's about 20 plus years old at least now. 25, maybe 30 actually. Anyway, but I think that hire made a lot of sense. That was again a name that I think we'd seen kind of rumored tied to Dan for each of the last couple of years, and so for him to finally make it out makes a lot of sense. And then Kavanaugh is like this one. I could have seen this from a mile away, not him specifically, but just trying to find a veteran coach to pair with Terry, right? As Matt kind of laid it out, I don't have much more to add, but right when I saw that name attached, and last week I think it was rumored and then finalized on Monday afternoon, it was kind of like, okay, yeah, obviously they need, not that Terry can't handle the job, but if you're gonna, you are going to, on most staffs, have an assistant offensive line coach, having somebody who's got as many years experience coaching as Terry has years on this planet, because I think Terry's 27 and Kavanaugh's been an assistant coach for more than 3 decades, makes a lot of sense. I think it's, obviously I don't know the personality marriage as well, but just from a career achievements and kind of what you're looking for, you got the really young position coach, up and coming, everybody's really high on, he's got some recruiting chops potentially, and then you've got Kavanaugh, who's been around the block a time or two, has success, has, as Matt said, ties to the region, has coached in the Pac-12 for a long time, has coaching ties throughout the country. But, so I think specifically working in the state, it makes a ton of sense, and I think fits really nicely with what they're trying to do offensively. And it'll be interesting to see now as we get into this, kind of what the blend between those two working together is. And, is Terry primarily working with the interior linemen and Kavanaugh with the tackles, kind of what the hierarchy, how does all of it work out? Because typically there is a breakdown of some sort like that. And I know Terry historically has been more of an interior guy, given what he coached or what he played in college as a center, I should say. So, yeah, no, I think they make a lot of sense.
I agree. I looked up the name pronunciations for Michalowski, and that's what it is, because I was confused at what it was going to be, but I thought that Kavanaugh was pretty easy to understand there, and then Michalowski was going to be the tough one. But yeah, I mean, Kavanaugh has obviously the more impressive resume, and is somebody who's going to be an immediate help to the program, and somebody who's, no disrespect, Mike, if you're listening to the program, but he comes in as probably the oldest man on the staff by 20 years compared to everybody else. I mean, he's been at least an assistant offensive line coach since 1987. So 10 years before I was born. And like Erik was saying, like, he's got more coaching experience than Alik Terry has years on this planet. But I think that's exactly what they needed, Erik. Just like you said, you saw this type of hire coming from a mile away, but obviously it wasn't exactly going to be Mike. But they needed a dude who could come in and talk about his coaching experience, and he's been doing that. And it's not like he hasn't been coaching recently. He's been the Syracuse offensive line coach for the last 4 years, since 2018. Before that, he was at Nebraska. Before that, he was at Hawaii. Oregon State for 9 years, then Hawaii before that.
He was a Mike Riley guy for a really long time there, basically from 97 to 2017.
I skipped one of them. I apologize, but yeah, a Connecticut born man, so we love that about him. Really appreciate adding that to the staff. I think it's a really good hire for Oregon. I think he's just going to be a guy who sticks around and helps offensive linemen. And while Alik might do most of the recruiting side of it because of his age, Mike is an excellent offensive line coach. He has like dozens of players who have gone on to the NFL. But for Michalowski, this is a perfect name. This was. Surprisingly, with his resume, he wasn't initially on the Dan Lanning staff when Dan first started, because, met up at Memphis back in 2015, 2016, outside linebacker coach for Dan, inside linebacker defensive graduate assistant at Memphis under Mike Norvell. Then they meet up again when Dan's the outside linebacker at Georgia. Michalowski follows Mel Tucker to Colorado. That doesn't really work out for Michalowski. It works out for Mel because he gets his new contract at Michigan State. Carl Durrell retains him. Then they both get fired because they stink. Not Michalowski, but the whole program. That team was really, really poor. And then Oregon State picks him up as a defensive quality control analyst. And, it's really hard to put into words what those defensive quality control analysts do, mostly because I'm not 100% sure what they do at all given times. I don't have like a resume of what these guys do as a defensive quality control analyst, but that was a good defense that Oregon State had last season, especially with their linebacking room where they were across the field. They did their job at points. Obviously, everybody thinks about the Oregon State game and how defensively the Oregon State, the Beavers defense really changed the complexion of what that game looked like. I don't know how much Michalowski has to do with that, but what I do know is that linebackers are his specialty. He's been coaching them basically the entire time that he's been either a graduate assistant or a quality control analyst or a defensive coordinator in Germany. Mind you, his defensive coordinator role in Germany, they brought, who was it? They brought their team to 6 more wins the next season, a playoff burst, first time in program history, and a playoff win for the first time in program history. So talk about turning around a defense and a program. Michalowski has done it at the national level and the country. So I'm not sure.
Better.
I know. I'm not sure if anybody has the resume that Michalowski has compared. I mean, he's helping nations out there on defense. So, but I digress. I think these are both very good hires for Oregon. I think it really, it's just going to help the program a lot. These are 2 roles that immediately need to be filled. In fact, Vianney, the guy who left Oregon as the assistant offensive line coach, just hired by Stanford for their official offensive line coach yesterday. So that was really big for him. I'm happy for him. He was, really important off the field guy here for Oregon in recruiting and with just personal relationships and coaching. But to see him go from in the same offseason, go from being named the offensive line coach at NAU to being named the offensive line coach at Stanford, massive step up. So I think it's a good, obviously great for Vianney. And then it's a good tell of who Dan is going after and how they progress and how they rise through the rankings, just like he did.
Can I I just
No.
had one stupid thing to say. I've got update on the age of Kavanaugh. I think you've been too critical on the guy. He's only like 58.
Okay, but how old is the oldest person on Oregon's football staff? Like 38?
Demetrius Martin's like probably. I mean, now I'm aging people. I'm just saying, like, he's not that much older. I mean, he's roughly the same age as Meat. Meat's like 50.
He's like double the age of Will Stein.
Yeah, well, no, not quite. Yeah, he's double the age, but he is literally double the age of Malik Terry, like more than double the age.
No disrespect, Mike. Again, it's just
I mean,
Oregon has had a lot of young players or young staff members to their team. Yeah, unfortunately, Mike, you just stand out.
He graduated from a school I'm sure you're very familiar with, Southern Connecticut State, in 1986.
Oh yeah,
go!
Go
I was
Owls.
expecting you. Is it really the Owls? I was expecting you to know the mascot.
Yeah. Come on.
So the Michalowski, the younger assistant coach here that was been hired, two of his top 3 recruits that he's ever signed have come from the state of Arizona. I think this program Dillingham was a big part of it. They still felt like after his departure that they had good positions in the state to recruit that area. But I think Oregon continues to see something in the state of Arizona that they want to be able to go out and find talent in that area. And that's just an antidote that maybe means something, maybe means nothing. And it's going to be interesting just to see, how long these guys are here. Michalowski, I would imagine, is the one that's probably going to be sought after more, if success, just because of age. He could, maybe Mike, maybe he turns into, a coach and he wants to be the full-time gig again as an offensive line coach. But I suspect he's going to have a pretty nice job because he'll have to be involved in recruiting, yes. But I would imagine most of his gig is going to be on-field scouting, player development, getting the team ready game to game, week to week, season to season. While Terry does that on top of handling a majority of the off-campus recruiting. Mike on campus will be involved, sure, but it's not his primary thing. I feel like Brian is going to be someone that's going to probably have to toe both lines here. Pretty aggressive on the recruiting trail, pretty aggressive skill development. All right, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll dive into basketball. Hey, breaking news for basketball for the women while we've been doing the pod. I don't know if Eric's seen this or not, but we'll touch base on it.
A tease.
After the break.
Mini tease.
All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. All conference honors have been released.
I haven't seen these.
For the women.
Okay. A live reaction.
The women did not get any of the individual awards, which I don't think should come as a surprise.
Van Sluten would have been a good candidate, maybe as freshman of the year.
Yes, that is true. Van Sluten as a freshman would have been one, but she did not get it. And Dia Rogers, the only Oregon Duck to be named an all-conference player.
Yeah, sounds right.
Honorable mention includes Tahina Pau and Grace Van Sluten. And then we also saw Chance Gray get honorable mention all defense. And then the all freshman team includes Chance Gray and Grace Van Sluten. So any surprises there, Eric?
Who is the freshman of the year?
Freshman of the year is Reagan Beers out of Oregon State. And she also won 6th player of the year as well. 6th man of the year. Or 6th one.
I think Van Sluten and Beers are both probably pretty similar footing in terms of that one. That was the one that I thought, in theory, and I genuinely haven't seen these, so I'm kind of reacting live. That was the one that I anticipated Oregon had a chance of probably winning. I think if Van Sluten had maybe finished the season, she didn't play the final 3 games, she'd have a pretty good chance. Beers is an interesting player because she's probably Oregon State's most gifted offensive player, but she came off the bench. But statistically, they're, I don't know, pretty comparable. 13-8 for Beers and 14-6 for Van Sluten. So both on pretty pretty mediocre teams this year. So kind of interesting. No, I'm not totally surprised with any of that. And then player of the year, I was curious if it was going to be Peely or Brink.
Player of the year is Peely, and then defensive player of the year is Brink.
Coach
Peely at Utah and Brink of Stanford.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds about right. Yeah. No. So, I mean, I don't have a whole lot more to say on that, I guess. I'm sure there's going to be people that thought Van Sluten should have won that. Probably could have a case for it. But, I mean, had she played more and had the team been a little more successful, I think she probably would have. I mean, if the team was maybe in sixth place in the conference and she played the last 3 games at a high level and they'd won those games with her playing, maybe it changes things. I don't know. But
I don't know Beers' stats, but seeing the press release from Oregon, I mean, scoring isn't everything, but Van Sluten leads the Pac-12 in all freshmen in scoring and is 4th among all Power 5 freshmen in the country in scoring. That's a pretty big stat, and to not win Freshman of the Year must say that Beers has got just really balanced, insane stats.
Well, she's 13-8, and Van Sluten's 14-6. Pretty much the same shooting from the field.
Yeah.
Beers is a good free throw shooter, a little better. But no, I mean, yeah, they're very comparable. That's why I kind of had anticipated Van Sluten had a. We don't need to belabor this too much because you get to maybe the team, but I anticipated Van Sluten had a pretty good case for that award. And I think if she maybe played the last 3 games, it's a bit of a difference. But
sure.
2 really good players. I mean, both were top 12, I think, recruits in the country. Beers was I think the highest rated non-Stanford freshman in the conference, and that's saying something because there's a lot of highly regarded incoming players. So.
All right, so the women, their regular season is over. They go to Vegas yesterday or today.
Today.
I would imagine.
Yeah.
Where does this program stand going into Vegas? Because it seems like everyone is hurt, but they've also come off 2 really good wins at home.
Yeah, they got the monkey off their back, so to speak. And I think it was, I mean, what they did this past weekend is give themselves a chance at making the tournament. It's not a great chance. I mean, I think it's probably now beating Washington gives you maybe a 50% chance, maybe a little better than that to get in. You lose to Washington, you don't make it. And by the way, I probably should say for those who aren't following closely, Washington is who Oregon plays in the opening round of the Pac-12 tournament on Wednesday at 2:30 p.m. Tune in if you care to see how they do. If they win that game, I think there's a decent chance that they make the tournament. They're currently the first team out of the field, according to Charlie Prehm, who does the bracket for the women, and they're 18th in the net. They're 18th in the net, and they're 16-13 on the season. It's just sort of outrageous. I think I've said this before. This is probably like Oregon is probably one of the weirder teams the committee's ever had to look at and decide what to do with, because they have the 7-game losing streak. They're barely 500 overall. They're 7-11 in conference play. Yet the conference is really tough. Every team Oregon lost to on this season, aside from Oregon State and probably Washington, is 100% making the tournament and dancing. And a lot of them are top 3, 4, 5 kind of seeds. Like about half of them are going to be teams that are in the top 5 seeds. So these are really good teams they're losing to. But at the same time, putting a team with 16 wins and 7-11 in its conference feels kind of weird, especially when they had this 7-game losing streak. So the victories help a lot, gives you some momentum. The unfortunate thing is that Van Sluten doesn't sound like we'll play on Wednesday, and now Chance Gray, who is their 4th leading scorer, and as Matt noted, one of the top freshmen in the conference, one of the better on-ball perimeter defenders in the conference. I don't know if she's playing on Wednesday. Kelly Graves said it's a question mark if she's available. And if she doesn't play, it's not just that now you remove another really good player. It's that you don't really have anyone left. You only have 7 players available, which is barely. I mean, that's not even really an operable roster. And by the way, Oregon's not the only team like that. I think it was Texas last night who I was watching on TV who also only had 7, and that's a really good program. And LSU is short on bodies. So, and I'm sure there are dozens of other examples around the country of programs that don't have a lot of players this time of year. But it really is a tough spot to be at when you are in a must-win game on Wednesday, and you'll be playing Washington, who, by the way, just beat Oregon about 9 days ago. I think a team that Oregon has more talent, Dan, but a team that clearly has the ability to beat them, as they just did. It's a tough break. It's a tough situation, and I'll let Jared, if he has some thoughts, run in, and because I have a couple more on just the tournament as a whole. But I think Saturday was probably one of those days for Kelly where you went, cool, we got the win, we needed to win. But because they only had 8 available players, he couldn't rest everybody. And at the end, Tahina goes down and Chance Gray goes down. And now you're dealing with a situation where at least one of them, it sounds like, might not be available, which hurts when you have a short bench to begin with.
Bless you, Matt. There was Tahina went down on Thursday as well, towards the middle or towards the end of the game. There's just a big collision across like the middle of the court where Tahina caught like somebody's leg to her leg. It was very, very strange collision, but post game she said that she was all right. Yeah, I mean, this is the depth concern is something we talked about like 4 months ago when the season basically began. Of like, all right, well, Jenna Asai leaves, Sedona Prince leaves. Suddenly you're down to like 9 operable players. 2 people get hurt, and you're really in a pinch. And here we are. They are in a pinch. It's tournament time, so basically like the end of the NBA season or football season or whatever season. It's everybody's dealing with injuries. Everybody's got them. Some nicks and bumps here. Van Sluten, I mean, do we want to play Ewing theory on this, or are we good, Erik?
Do you want to play Ewing theory on this? The thought has crossed my mind. I just think it
opens up the floor a little bit more than when they were before, because
I think that point's fair.
Grace operates, basically exclusively from 17 feet and in. And we've seen Tahina Paopao and India Rogers both score 15 points or more in the last 2 games, both wins, mind you. So I think those were very solid performances. And Paopao, especially against ASU, who's a lesser opponent, I thought her performance against Arizona might have been better just because of how good defensively Arizona is. And she hit some huge shots to push the lead to 10 to 12 to 15, where they ultimately won. I mean, I still think Grace is incredibly talented. We talked about how the fact that she really had a good contention to win Pac-12 Freshman of the Year. I don't know. I think it's worth an Ewing theory conversation. Again, I don't want to dismiss Van Sluten because she's really good, and I think that her future is really, really bright at Oregon just because of her pure talent level. But I do think it kind of spaces up the floor and gives them more driving lanes and gives them more opportunities to find open shooters. This comes down to like the men's team too. When Oregon hits their shots and from the perimeter, they're pretty hard to beat. So that's what they've been doing the last 2 games when they're on the 2-game winning streak after a 7-game losing streak where they did not hit their perimeter shots. So I don't know. I mean, I don't want to dive too into it. It was more of a joking Ewing theory matter. But it's interesting the way the level of the play has changed over the last 2 games.
What I've always thought, watching Kelly Graves teams, and I've watched probably more than most because I watched at Oregon and also at Gonzaga, but when his teams have been at their best, it's typically with one traditional big and then a kind of a more versatile power forward who can do a little bit more on the perimeter. Think about what Satu Sabali offered Oregon here. At Gonzaga, they had a couple players that were it's been 10 plus years. I can't think of her name, but they had a good stretch kind of power forward who was also capable at the top of the key. And I could probably look up her stats now, but who really cares? But that has always kind of, to me, felt like from a roster build, the one that makes the most sense for the type of offense they want to use, where you've got, it's a high, they utilize the pick and roll a lot, and usually having a very good, like Ruthie was obviously excellent in the pick and roll, and she could kind of be the primarily screener and roller. And then you've got another player who can sit in the corner, or another player who can sit kind of near the back end of the basket for to take a dump pass. Like those are the types of roles that you typically see there. And I think with Philly being clearly the player you're using in the role the most, you've kind of got Grace in kind of a weird spot. So I could kind of see what you're getting at, Jared, in terms of maybe I could say like, yeah, there's a Ewing theory from the role that's been kind of changed, and Taya Hansen is now playing kind of, a pseudo power forward role, but it's kind of, but it's more of a perimeter role where she's defensively, and I think defensively you probably lose a little bit of size and length, but offensively, I could see where you probably are onto something. And certainly the shooting stats, and who knows why all of it works together this way, but it is interesting that the moment Grace leaves the lineup, that Tahina has 3 straight really good shooting games. I think there are probably a lot of factors at play there, and not all of them are losing your second leading scorer and one of the better players in the conference. But Certainly something that's sort of interesting to think about when you look at this roster and you wonder, I don't know when/if Van Sluten comes back, because it doesn't sound like it'll be Wednesday and probably isn't Thursday. So I don't know if it'll be this week, and then who knows what they have after. But it will be interesting to see how this team adapts. And I think even more interesting will be to see if they adapt at all a year from now, where you've got those players as well. Sorry, what's that?
That's like that's Van Sluten's natural progression, right? Is to stretch out that jumper to spread the floor, because her and Che, that's probably a big reason why it's so clogged up, is because they have two people out there that can't shoot.
Yeah, no, it's exactly right. And I know that was, I was talking with some people around the program, like they were hoping she could develop into almost a small forward at some point, or at least that sort of a skill set. And I think you see a little bit of it, but she struggles to hit. Yeah, but she kind of struggles with that 12, 15-footer, which she shoots a lot. I know we're going down this path probably more than the listeners would like, but
and she struggles at free throws, which is always the telltale sign.
Yeah, but she's 67%, which is okay. But yeah, there are some moments where you're kind of going like, it looks good coming off, but it doesn't go down quite as consistently. 6'7" okay for a true freshman. Like I expect that'll go up, but I don't know. Yeah. I kind of think you make an interesting point in terms of just the way the roster has set up. Like to me that Oregon has been even the past couple of years probably at its best when they play one traditional big and then kind of a versatile four. And they just really haven't had that many players that can fit that role since Satiu left. I think that's probably one of the biggest issues they've had since is that sort of supplementary role. And it's hard enough to find the point guard and the big to kind of run everything through, but that kind of extra piece there is probably one thing that I imagine that they'll continue to kind of work on and hopefully focus some of Van Sluten's talents into picking that part up.
Now, real quick before we transition to the men, just if they beat Washington, they face Stanford, right?
Correct.
Seems highly unlikely that they get the win against Stanford.
Yeah, probably.
Do you view this as a successful season? If they get to Washington, and obviously if they don't make the tournament, it's probably a down year. But what's your confidence level that they do make it? Or I guess make your pick if they win the game. They have to look good and blow out Washington and then be competitive with Stanford, or does that matter at all?
To your first part, I just want to say I think the season's going to be looked at as a disappointment almost regardless of outcome, unless they beat Washington, beat Stanford somehow, make the tournament, and then get through the first weekend. And even then, that might be kind of looked at as like kind of about what you were expected to. This team was picked to finish second in the conference, and whether or not that was fair or not coming into the season, like people thought this team was going to be a lot better than it is. And the fact that they're having to kind of battle at the end is, I think, for pretty much everybody involved, disappointing. I think from players to coaches to those who support the program to those who cover it. I don't think anybody's sitting here going like, now this year actually played out exactly how we wanted it to. Like, I think it's been a kind of disappointing. In terms of the outcome on Wednesday, I think Washington's a beatable team for Oregon. I actually think the matchup is probably more favorable than others, in part because, well, like what Washington is a team that doesn't have an elite interior player that you have to deal with. So Che will be, and Che's actually fared really well against the conference's best players. Like some of her best games have been against Stanford and USC, where you have Rhea Marshall and you have Cameron Brink, who are the league's probably two premier centers or two premier big bigs. Peely's kind of more of a power forward, but so that part is kind of beneficial. Where if you were Washington and you had a really good big to go to, you could maybe get Che into foul trouble, and without then you have to play a lot of Kennedy Basham, and I think Kennedy's given them some good minutes of late, but I don't know how you feel about her playing more than maybe 12 to 15 minutes per game anyway. So that part's a positive. And then Washington doesn't really have the scoring ability that a lot of teams in this conference do. They're a really good, I think, very, very fundamentally sound, good defensive team. They play smart basketball, but they don't have individual players who on the perimeter who could, in theory, keep up with Tahina Paopao and India Rogers if they're having really good games. So you feel good about like, okay, this matchup could be advantageous if Paopao keeps hitting and Rogers can be consistent, and you can get maybe a little bit from Che inside and Hosendove and Hansen and whatnot. But if Gray doesn't play, the margin of error is basically eliminated, because outside of Pau and Rogers, she's really your only other potential big scoring option, and she's your best probably catch and shoot 3-point shooter other than Pau right now. The other part that's tough is that you'd probably be elevating either Elise Hurst or Taylor Hosendove to the starting lineup. Hurst has been just really a disappointment. If you look at her stats, it's something else. She's shooting, I think, about 10% from three in conference play. And it's just been pretty tough. I don't have much more to add there.
Yeah.
Hosendove I actually like and think that could be okay, but at the same time, like it's still like you're still having to play Hurst like probably 25 plus minutes.
Yeah.
Now it's Gray can't play. So no, it's a tough spot and it's a bummer. But I mean, I think if they were healthy, I think you have a pretty good shot. And I think even if Gray plays and Van Sluten doesn't, they have a pretty good shot. But if Gray doesn't play, that's going to be a real uphill battle for them to try to win with 7 players and without 2 of your top 4 scorers who again have been playing 30 minutes per game most of the season, to then try to say, hey, we're just going to replace that with a couple of guys off the bench who are playing 12 to 15 most of the year. It's tough. So no, I think they have a shot on Wednesday. I wouldn't, as Matt said, I probably don't have much optimism at all of them beating Stanford, but they've done enough this past week, and we can, I think, at least go into a game with Washington and say, hey, they could very much win this game. At the same time, you also go, well, they're a little dinged up. They're short some players. I wouldn't be surprised either if it's a one and done in Las Vegas, which would be a really kind of a sad, sour end to a season.
All right, let's shift now to the men here. The Ducks are 5th in the standings. They're 10-8 in conference play. They are 16-13 overall. And even with the 3-game losing streak at home to UCLA, the 1-point loss in overtime to Washington, and then the 3-point loss at Washington State, 4th place is still attainable for the Oregon men. The scenario is pretty simple. Win out, and ASU needs to lose to UCLA. Doesn't matter if ASU beats USC, lose to UCLA. If they beat UCLA, it becomes basically impossible for Oregon to get the 4 seed. And why is the 4 seed important? You get the bye. You don't have to play 4 games in 4 nights. You play 3 games in 3 nights if you win the whole thing. Oregon's worst case scenario is they lose 2 games at home this week to last place California and 10th place Stanford, and they fall to 7th in the conference standings. That may actually have a better chance at getting you to the conference championship game. I think Oregon matches up better with Arizona than they do UCLA. They've beaten Arizona. They've failed to beat UCLA, but you want the easiest path possible, in my opinion. The men go into their last home games this season, and much like the women, it feels down. It feels disappointing. But I don't think either of these – I'm pretty sure. I don't think Oregon will get to the tournament with just 2 wins. Winning these in the final 2 games of the season shouldn't secure Oregon into the dance. What gets interesting, though, is what happens if they do get that 4 seed and they do knock off a Utah or an Arizona State in that quarterfinal round, and they're 19-14 on the season. That might be a play-in game. I don't know.
I mean, it's going to be really close. Like you said, winning this weekend really doesn't do anything. It's a hell of a lot better than losing, but winning this weekend gets Oregon's schedule 1% better. Cal and Stanford both stink. Mind you, Oregon has already lost to Stanford, so that's a pretty stinky loss on their resume. So, but Cal, I mean, good Lord, for anybody who's going to the Cal game this weekend, don't. That's a bad program. But Stanford should be at least an interesting game. They always play Oregon tough, even though whenever they're good, it's an even better game. But even when they're bad, they still play Oregon really hard. We have this conversation nearly almost every podcast at this point of what Oregon almost has to do to get into the tournament, and it keeps kind of changing every week because of the projections and because of who else loses and because, frankly, no one this year is good at college basketball because
Yeah.
every number 1 or 2 teams in the country, they all lose randomly to some human or some groups of humans. Some team is what they call it in the real world. Like Arizona losing to Arizona State on a half-court buzzer beater. I mean, that really helps Oregon's resume if you look at it, because Oregon beat Arizona State and Arizona. So that Arizona State continuing to climb and continuing to be a quad 1 win or a quad 1 loss really helps Oregon's resume. But again, this all hinges a lot on other teams winning or losing for Oregon to A, get the bye, and B, get into the tournament. So I won't sit here and tell you that it's nearly impossible, even though it kind of is. But there's a good chance that these routes of what they need to happen because of how inconsistent every team in college basketball has been this season and how crazy March Madness is. I mean, March is literally tomorrow. So, we're approaching one of the best months of the calendar year. And for Oregon, you're not in the position you hoped you'd like to be at the beginning of the season or wished you'd like to be at the beginning of the season. But, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt in saying that at least you're in a position to potentially make the tournament. But it's certainly not what they expected. It's certainly not what they want. Relying on other teams to win or lose is never what you want in this scenario. So, again, it's a slim chance, but it's still there, and I would expect 2 wins this weekend. If they have 1 loss, that should do it. I won't say it will do it, but it should do it for their tournament hopes.
Well,
they can still win the conference, Jared. They can always still find a way to keep extending.
I was just gonna say, outside of winning the conference, if they lose one of these 2 games, they're done. Because California is 304th. In the net rankings.
Unreal. That's unbelievable.
Oregon State is bad, and they are 214th. And that is embarrassing for the Pac-12 conference. And you have to scroll almost 4 clicks down your mouse to find California, to find the worst team in the conference. This game...
Are they the worst Power 5 team?
I'm pretty sure. They're probably close. I'm
looking right now.
I'll pull it up. But the point I was going to make is Oregon gains the only thing that they gain in this game on Thursday is if they win is another number in the win column, because their net will go down by playing this game. Their strength of schedule will go down by playing this game. This is a game that you play. This is an opponent that you play the first week of the season. And that's the struggle that Oregon is facing, and that's why that UCLA loss at home was so bad, and that's why not getting a road split at Washington or Washington State was so important, because you knew after that Oregon State was bad, and these 2 teams at home, Cal and Stanford, Thursday, Saturday, will do nothing for your NCAA tournament resume, if only thing hurt it. Now it opens the door also for Senior Day. It's going to be Will Richardson's final game at Oregon, unless the NIT comes calling and they get a home game there. And it also could be a moment where we get maybe a little clarity of who could be coming back, who could be saying, I'm also not coming back to Oregon. Will has no choice. He's exhausted all eligibility. And N'Faly Dante is a senior, but has a COVID year. Quincy Guerrier is a senior, but has a COVID year. Keyshawn Bartholomew is a senior, and he has a COVID year. Luke Wurr is a redshirt junior. So theoretically, he should be graduating soon. There's going to be some guys on this team that we could make a big deal about them walking or not walking, or it could just be, a delay of the inevitable. I don't know yet. We don't know that answer, but we could get some clarity, maybe even tonight when I go to Pac-12 Oregon Media Day or media availability, about just who could be coming back next season, which could give us a better glimpse of what the team could look like.
Outside of Dante, is there a player that you'd want back?
I think I forgot to mention Rivaldo Soares too. I think if you looked at it and said, hey, Guerrier, Soares, and Couisnard, if those 3 guys said, as seniors, they wanted to come back, I think you take them. Kuznard is a good starter, and I think Soares and Guerrier could be really solid rotation pieces. And if N'Faly Dante wants to come back, like, yes, come. Be our starting center.
That's why I said, obviously, you take him back. But,
yeah.
I mean,
I think if all four want to come back, you say yes.
Yeah, I mean, this group hasn't worked though for the last 2 years with 3 of those 4 guys that we just talked about, minus Kuznard, just because this is first year with the program. I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing Kuznard because I think a full healthy season of Jermaine would really be beneficial to Oregon. I just think you can find fresh faces in the transfer portal market that can do very similar traits to what Rivaldo Soares and Quincy Guerrier can do. Guerrier I really liked last year. I would have argued last season that he was like the player with the most NBA draft potential because he was like a 6'9" power forward who could spread the floor sort of. And then this year he's just completely dipped in his shooting percentages and just his overall play. And for Soares, I love the guy, big Boston person, but other than those 5 points he just scored at Oregon State, I mean, he's playing good perimeter defense, but there's a lot of guys I think who can do that.
I think Soares' value is his experience and his glue guy mentality. You can ask him to be a defender and he's okay with it. You can ask him to be, a guy that gives you rebounds. He's okay with it. Like,
right.
You need those. You need those guys.
You do, but I feel like they already have those guys. You can ask Luke Ward to do exactly the same thing as Soares. And there have been points on the year where they've needed Soares to do more than just defend and rebound. And it's been a struggle other than, again, the 5 points. The only 5 points he scored against Oregon State happened to be the most important 5 points in the basketball game.
It's true. It's true. I mean, Luke Ward, Dana Altman says he's going to play him more. I think Soares brings just a little bit more versatility with ball handling because Luke is not a good ball handler. But you're right.
Sure.
Like you can get some of the stuff that you get from Soares out of Luke Ward. But the way I just look at it is like if these guys come back, Guerrier, Soares, and Kuznard, I'm thinking Dante's gone. If these guys come back, that just makes life easier for Evans, Cook, and Shellstead to be your guys. You've got veterans on the team. You've got, I think Quincy and Soares are accepting of their roles as kind of secondary artillery pieces. Kuznard can be your go-to guy until Evans and Cook and Shellstead are there, if they are there next season. I don't know if they will be, but I just feel like you've got the experience and you've got the veteran core here in place to allow the freshmen just to be freshmen, not have that expectation to be elite immediately every single night.
Go for it.
I had a trivia question. I didn't want to interrupt your conversation though, because it seemed like you had banter going. I have a trivia thing later if you guys have more.
I just had one more thing. I think Oregon in the portal, they just got to hit. They have to try to hit a home run. 100%. They need to bring in some dude who can hit 18 to 20 points a night, and then that alleviates even more of the freshman pressure. Because I know what you're saying, Matt, with the idea that experience is going to, with these freshmen, the experience and the known roles are going to limit their performances, and they don't have to feel like they got to be the best guy on the court every night. My fear is that they're going to need to think that they are the best guy in the court every night because the guys that would be hypothetically returning outside of Kuznard aren't going to produce that much. So they're still going to need to be guys who can score 12 to 15 points a night because I'm not relying on Rivaldo Soares and Quincy Guerrier to score more than 10 points a night combined. Go ahead, Eric.
So earlier we were talking about Cal and how we thought the worst Power 5 team in college basketball. Matt has to leave. Oh, I was hoping to ask this trivia question to Matt, but I'll ask it to you, Jared, as well, since you're here and Matt has to leave.
I am here.
There's actually one Power 5 team that is worse than Cal in the net ranking. Do you want to venture a guess? And it is I would say that you would probably consider this program, at least recently, borderline blue blood.
Borderline blue blood recent. Oh, Florida State.
No, much worse than them, same conference.
I knew it was the ACC. Excuse my French, they stink. They're terrible this season.
The back half is not good, and particularly one team which has won 4 games and has a new coach, and it's not.
Oh, Louisville. Yeah,
is.
I'm gonna swear they fucking stink, man. Holy shit, they stink. They're terrible.
Matt,
Welcome back, Matt.
Did you hear the answer to the trivia question?
No, I did not.
Okay,
I didn't know the question either.
The question was, and it led to Jared using an F-bomb while you're gone, so things really went on.
I heard that.
Oh, good.
There actually is one Power 5 team worse than Cal in the net ranking. Jared got it after 2 guesses, and a bit of a hint. Do you want to venture a guess?
Worse team than Cal.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They're 308th. They've won 4 games all season. And the hint I gave was this is a ACC formerly. Yes. I almost said we talked about this program while having beers with Steve Mims a couple of nights ago, which was a good time. So.
Yeah, Louisville, I forgot. Kenny Payne's inaugural year is disastrous.
His first year might not have more. His
first year may be his only year.
Yeah, sadly.
Yeah.
Former Oregon assistant coach, by the way.
Yes. Josh Jameson, former director of operations, is also there as well, which would be a bummer.
Okay.
All right. Let's go do it for us for the Autzen Audibles podcast today. Thank you for listening to the show. We'll be back later this week with more on the podcast, more football, basketball, recruiting, baseball, softball. Who knows what's going to come on the pod, but we'll be back at some point this week. Till then, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.